Have you ever stopped to truly consider how real the world around you is? I mean, really truly think about it. Not in a philosophical, late-night dorm room kind of way, but in a concrete, scientific sense. We experience the world through our senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. We take for granted that what we perceive is an accurate reflection of reality. But what if I told you that what you perceive isn't reality itself, but rather a meticulously crafted interpretation of it, a kind of personalized virtual reality built by your brain? Think about the dress phenomenon from a few years back. Remember, that image that circulated the internet, a seemingly simple dress that some people saw as blue and black, while others swore it was white and gold. It wasn't a trick of the monitor or some mass delusion. It was a potent demonstration of the fact that perception is subjective. It's something that varies from person to person, and that the colors we see are not inherent properties of the objects themselves, but rather the result of our brains interpreting the light that bounces off them. That single image sparked countless debates and highlighted something profound. Two people looking at the exact same thing can experience it in fundamentally different ways, or consider the phenomenon known as synesthesia. People with synesthesia experience a blending of the senses, where stimulation of one sense triggers experiences in another. Some might hear colors, taste sounds, or see numbers as having distinct personalities. For example, a synesthete, that is, a person who experiences synesthesia, might experience the number 5 as a vibrant, pulsating blue, or the sound of a violin as a swirling, velvety texture. While this might seem unusual, it underscores the inherent plasticity of our brains, their remarkable ability to change and adapt, and the interpretive power of our perceptual systems. It demonstrates that the boundaries between our senses are not as rigid as we might think, and that the brain is capable of creating remarkably unique and personalized experiences of the world. These aren't just fringe occurrences or oddities. They are windows into the very core of how we, all of us, experience reality. Cognitive science, the field dedicated to understanding the mind and its processes, offers a fascinating perspective on this. It tells us that perception isn't a passive reception of information, like a camera simply recording what's in front of it. Instead, it's an active, constructive process, a dynamic interplay between the raw sensory data we receive and the complex machinery of our brains. Let's break down this process. Imagine your eyes. They are, in essence, sophisticated biological sensors. They don't see in the way we commonly understand it. They detect light waves, photons, of varying wavelengths. These photons strike specialized cells in the retina, the light-sensitive layer at the back of the eye, called photoreceptors. These photoreceptors, known as rods and cones, perform a crucial act of transduction. Essentially, they convert the physical energy of light, something completely intangible, into electrical signals, the language that our brains use to communicate. It's a transformation as radical as converting sound waves into written text. These electrical signals then travel along the optic nerve, a bundle of more than 1 million nerve fibers, to the visual cortex, which is located at the back of the brain. This is where the real magic begins. The visual cortex doesn't just receive a raw pixelated image, it starts to interpret, organize, and make sense of the incoming information. It analyzes edges, contours, colors, and movement, piecing together a coherent representation of the visual scene. This process isn't limited to vision. Our other senses, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, operate on the same fundamental principles. Each sense has its own specialized receptors that transduce or convert a particular form of physical energy. Sound waves for hearing, pressure for touch, chemical molecules for taste and smell, into neural signals. These signals are then relayed to their respective processing areas in the brain, where they are further analyzed and interpreted. But here's the crucial point. The brain isn't just a passive recipient of these sensory signals. It actively shapes and molds them, guided by a set of built-in rules and assumptions, as well as by our past experiences, expectations, and even our current emotional state. Consider the principles of Gestalt psychology, for instance. Gestalt psychology is a school of thought that emphasizes our mind's tendency to perceive patterns and wholes rather than just individual elements. These principles, developed in the early 20th century, describe how we tend to organize sensory information into meaningful patterns. One of these principles is proximity. We naturally tend to group together objects that are close to each other, perceiving them as belonging to a single unit. Another is similarity. We group together objects that share similar features like color, shape, or size. The principle of closure explains why we tend to perceive incomplete figures as complete, our minds filling in the missing gaps. And the principle of continuity suggests that we perceive lines or curves as continuing in a smooth, predictable direction, even when they are partially obscured. These principles aren't just arbitrary rules. They reflect the brain's inherent tendency to find order and meaning in the often chaotic and ambiguous sensory information it receives. They are shortcuts or heuristics, essentially mental rules of thumb, that allow us to quickly and efficiently make sense of the world around us, without having to consciously analyze every single detail. Another powerful example of the brain's active role in perception is perceptual constancy. This refers to our remarkable ability to perceive objects as having stable properties, such as size, shape, and color, even when the sensory information we receive about them changes dramatically. For example, you recognize a door as a door whether it's fully open, partially ajar, or viewed from a distance. The image projected onto your retina changes significantly in each of these cases, but your brain corrects for these variations, allowing you to perceive the door as a constant, unchanging object. This is crucial for navigating the world. Imagine if the perceived size of objects changed drastically every time you moved your head. And then there's the fascinating phenomenon of depth perception. Our retinas, remember, receive two-dimensional images, much like a photograph. Yet we perceive the world in 3 dimensions. How is this possible? The brain uses a variety of cues, both monocular, those available to just one eye, and binocular, those requiring both eyes, to infer depth. Monocular cues include things like linear perspective, the way parallel lines appear to converge in the distance, relative size, where objects that are farther away appear smaller, and occlusion, where closer objects block our view of objects that are farther away. Binocular cues, on the other hand, rely on the slight difference in the images received by each eye, a phenomenon known as binocular disparity. This slight difference provides information about the relative distance of objects. The brain uses this disparity to calculate the distance of objects. All of these processes, Gestalt principles, perceptual constancy, depth perception, happen largely automatically and unconsciously. We're not typically aware of the complex computations that are taking place behind the scenes, but they are absolutely essential for creating a stable, coherent, and meaningful representation of the world. But our perception isn't solely driven by the bottom-up flow of sensory information, the information coming directly from our senses. It's also profoundly influenced by top-down processes, our prior knowledge, expectations, beliefs, and even our current goals and motivations. Think about the cocktail party effect. Imagine you're at a crowded, noisy party. You're surrounded by a cacophony of voices, music, and clinking glasses. Yet, you're able to focus your attention on a single conversation, effectively filtering out the surrounding noise. This is a remarkable feat of selective attention, our ability to focus on specific sensory information while ignoring other information. Your brain actively selects which sensory information to prioritize and which to ignore based on your current goals. In this case, understanding the conversation you're engaged in. Our expectations also play a huge role in shaping our perception. If you're expecting to see something, you're more likely to see it, even if the sensory evidence is somewhat ambiguous. This is one of the reasons why eyewitness testimony can be so unreliable. Our memories and biases can easily color our perception of events, leading us to see what we expect to see, rather than what actually happened. Consider also the power of context. The very same sensory stimulus can be perceived in vastly different ways depending on the surrounding context. For example, the letter B might be perceived as the number 13 if it's presented in a sequence of numbers. Our brains use contextual information to resolve ambiguity and make sense of the sensory input. Illusions offer perhaps the most compelling demonstrations of the brain's active role in constructing perception. Optical illusions, for instance, exploit the very mechanisms that normally allow us to perceive the world accurately, leading us to see things that aren't actually there, or to misperceive things that are. The Muller-Lyer illusion, for example, features two lines of equal length, one with arrowheads pointing inward and the other with arrowheads pointing outward. The line with outward pointing arrowheads typically appears longer, even though the lines are measurably identical. This illusion reveals how our brains use contextual cues, in this case the angles of the arrowheads, to make inferences about size and distance. Auditory illusions, such as the shepherd tone illusion, create the perception of a continuously ascending or descending tone, even though the sound is actually looping. This fascinating illusion exploits our brain's tendency to perceive patterns and continuity, even when they don't exist in the physical stimulus. These illusions aren't just fun tricks, they are valuable tools for researchers, providing insights into the underlying mechanisms of perception. By studying how and why illusions work, we can learn more about how the brain normally processes sensory information, and it's also vital to think about the crucial interplay between perception and action. It's a two-way street. Our perception guides our actions, allowing us to interact with the world effectively. We reach for objects, navigate obstacles, and respond to threats based on what we perceive. But our actions also shape our perception. The way we move our eyes, head, and body influences the sensory information we receive. For example, actively exploring an object with our hands provides us with much richer and more detailed information than simply looking at it. This dynamic interplay, this constant feedback loop between perception and action, is essential for our ability to adapt and thrive in a complex and ever-changing environment. So, what does all of this mean? It means that the reality we experience is not a direct reflection of the external world, but rather a construction, a meticulously crafted interpretation built by our brains. Our senses provide us with limited and often ambiguous information, and our brains actively fill in the gaps, using built-in rules, prior knowledge, and expectations to create a coherent and meaningful representation. This understanding has profound implications. It challenges our intuitive notion of a single objective reality. It suggests that our perception is inherently subjective, shaped by our individual experiences, biases, and even our current emotional state. It also highlights the incredible power and flexibility of the human brain, its ability to transform raw sensory data into a rich and complex experience of the world. This knowledge isn't just academic, it has practical applications in a wide range of fields. In design, understanding how people perceive visual information can lead to the creation of more effective and user-friendly interfaces. In technology, this knowledge is crucial for developing virtual and augmented reality systems that create immersive and believable experiences. In healthcare, understanding perceptual disorders can lead to better treatments and rehabilitation strategies. In art, artists have long exploited the principles of perception to create works that are visually engaging and emotionally evocative. Ultimately, understanding how we perceive the world is about understanding ourselves. It's about recognizing the incredible complexity and creativity of the human mind, and appreciating the profound ways in which our brains shape our experience of reality. It's a journey of discovery that challenges us to question our assumptions, to embrace ambiguity, and to appreciate the subjective, constructed nature of our own unique experience of the world. And perhaps it encourages us to be a little more understanding, a little more empathetic, knowing that each of us, in a very real sense, inhabits our own uniquely crafted version of reality.